Yesterday, supposed to be some more in later in the week, and they're supposed to actually start breaking ground next Monday on the phase 2 project, so. That's all
Keep busy.
Very.
In addition to my emailed report, we have a pump go down at the Erie Street pump station. Tracy hooked me up with the guy that does the sewer pumps, and he basically said it's not worth rebuilding. We'd have to get a flight pump because it's flight control, so we'd have to get a flight pump. The estimate is 16,000 and some change. I haven't quite figured out how we're going to pay for it yet, but the backup pump is working as we speak, and when I figure out how we're going to pay for it, we'll have to replace the pump. The pumping station's up and working now, so. And the other thing is, our code enforcement officer took a position with Vestal, so March 8th is going to be his last day.
I have a meeting with him Friday. We talked about staying on still until we find a replacement.
He told me he might be able to give us a couple
Per diem.
hours a day. He can't do his job now, so I'm not sure I want to waste my money on 2 hours a day. But
That for me.
that's all I got.
We talked about the ambulance service.
Yeah, we can. So, since it's department head reports, we had a meeting last week, right? Yeah. What I remember. About the Build EMS services. Ambulance squad leaders and fire department leaders. Basically, there's a couple of options we can go to achieve the Build EMS. And we can explain them.
So
Better than I can.
the path that we've been moving down since about May last year, and some of you might recall the board expressed approval for this, concept that the fire chief had come in and given, I think, a pretty thorough presentation as to what that would eventually look like as a structure. But long story short, it would have been I'll say quasi-independent, non-profit EMS squad that would have a contract with the village for services. They would lease space within the existing fire station. It would be the exact same space that all the ambulances are currently sitting in now. But for legal purposes, they would have an actual lease, and the village would, through that contract, authorize that quasi-independent squad to do the billing. The two paid EMTs who are currently employees of the village would have become the nonprofit squad's employees. And there's other details in it, but that's the broad concept. Since about May last year, the squad has been formed as a nonprofit and has been working to transfer what's called the Certificate of Need, which is currently in the village's name, to the quasi-independent nonprofit company. That's hit a couple of just bumps in the road, I'm going to call it, in the past few months or so, which has prompted the village to reconsider or bring everyone back to the table for a discussion about what other alternatives we might be able to utilize. So this brings up the second option, which is creating, I'll call it the OWEGO Emergency Department, which would be like the fire department, only for ambulances. And effectively there'd be a separation between the fire department and the EMS department for purposes of considering it as the department head, most likely be the current EMS chief, and that would also allow us to bill. It would keep it all in-house. Members of the current emergency rescue squad would still be members of the fire department. I think that's important to make it clear. But when acting as EMS providers, they'd be considered volunteers of the ambulance department, not volunteers of the fire department at that moment in time. As a long story and a really short way to try to explain it.
Right.
So we believe that doing it this way, we know, the 2 paid EMTs would continue to remain village employees. We think just talking through the expected timeline that we could have a third-party billing company on board sometime at the end of March, early April, so that the individuals who would actually be providing the services could get the training and how to actually, keep track of everything for the billing, so that if we authorize billing, then we could presumably start it up at some point in May. And we've been told that the lead time on collection is about 3 months, which means payments should start coming in around August sometime, which actually matches neatly with the fiscal year. That is one of the big benefits to this. If we continue to pursue down the transfer of the certificate of need to the nonprofit EMS squad, we're concerned that the timing would be pushed off some unknown number of additional months simply to even get the billing up. So that is the thought at this point. Of course, that was the discussion last night. The people who had come to the table expressed, I think, some interest in going the EMS department route, keeping it within the village. If the village board kind of has interest in that as well, then I think at the next meeting I'd bring a resolution to essentially, for the board's consideration, to declare the EMS department of the village of Owego will now exist, and will put in place that structure and to authorize retention of a billing agency and to otherwise kind of push down this route.
Okay, so you're saying it'll be separate from the fire department?
Yes.
Yes and no.
Yeah, it would be, so we have a fire department with a fire chief. We would have an EMS department with an EMS chief. We could consider, having the position of, call it director of public safety, or maybe another phrase for it. And that could be somebody who oversees the fire chief and the EMS chief, and the fire chief could be that same person, and he could oversee himself. And that effectively, what we try to do by doing this is actually mirroring the existing structure that we're currently operating under. There is an EMS squad, they have a chief, they operate fairly autonomously for a number of things, and by passing this resolution, we'd kind of be recognizing what we're already doing from an organizational standpoint. And again, to reiterate, the people who are actually running on the ambulances, they're members of the fire department now. They will still be members of the fire department in the future. Just for insurance purposes and billing purposes, when they're providing ambulance services, then they would be considered ambulance workers, not firefighters. But the idea and the expectation is if they get on an ambulance and run to a fire call, because they're the people who are EMS qualified, but the fire chief says, hey, I need you to go run some hose, then they can still do that too, and everyone will still be covered for insurance purposes.
Okay. This is necessary in order for us to bill. They have to be, one of these, a couple of ways they have to be split off in order,
Yeah.
or we can't bill.
I was just trying to be clear on it. And so will we have to hire some staff to take care of the billing and bookkeeping and all that?
So the idea would be that a third-party billing agency would be retained to do that. Instead of asking the Cynthia and Kim in the clerk's office to try to
Yeah.
tackle that.
They take a percentage of the bills they collect.
Right. And the idea would
That's how they
be,
get paid.
once the board votes to actually say, all right, emergency department, then the next step would be, okay, let's get some quotes from these
Right.
agencies, see what their contracts really look like, and then the board would need to pick which agency to go with, or which billing agency to go with.
Which services they're gonna offer, what percentage they're gonna want,
Right.
all the details.
Another piece, I believe that the corporation of the EMS, whatever the names are, is having a meeting Wednesday. That would be a good time for the squad people that are a member of that corporation to weigh into their leadership about whether they have a desire for this type of plan. So that would be something that you guys might do and bring back to us. It's a thought.
Well,
So two items of interest. If it is the way of the village board to do this, do you want the EMS leadership to start seeking out proposals from the billing companies, because that's gonna take a little time. And you have most of the EMS leadership here. Number one, we can take on that task. Number two is if, along with the consideration of membership requirements, you can do a little bit better with recruitment of outside individuals if the personnel are not members of the fire department. AKA if there's somebody from Appalachian or Nichols that wants to drive ambulances for us, and they cannot be members of two fire departments, but they can be members of infinite number of ambulance agencies. So, is it the, do you plan on using the OES as the membership and following their bylaws?
I mean, nothing's set yet, but that's what we talked about last night.
Okay,
And to be clear, you know, that we did touch on this briefly last night as well. Certainly, if the board in the future says, you know what, we would like to do, or to accept volunteers who are not members of our fire department to also provide services, then the board in the future could also make that decision. But the conversation last night was that they would be required to also be members of the fire department.
okay, because some people get scared off by the membership of the fire department, and it just opens up your realm of membership if it's not within the fire department.
I think really, if we use the OES as the house for the volunteer members, really the requirements to be a volunteer come from those bylaws, not necessarily us.
They do, and currently my understanding is that the Owego Emergency Squad nonprofit is tied to the Owego Fire Department nonprofit.
And we could change those bylaws if needed.
If there was if somebody desired that, you know, I mean, it's not set in stone.
Okay.
So it sounds like at least I haven't heard from the board yet.
Right.
Do you folks, I know Rusty and the mayor were at the meeting last night. Do you guys have any concerns? I mean, does this interest you? Should I bring this as a resolution to the board for the next meeting? For further consideration and discussion, of course.
Well, just generally, I kind of like the idea of having the two separate emergency and fire department. So that the chief of the emergency can do scheduling and take on
Right.
the leadership role.
They're already functioning very similar to this.
See, whatever it takes to maintain, what it takes to have them work hand in hand, I mean, can have one without the other. It's been that way since, I can remember 18 years in the service, so.
I agree, I think it would make more sense to have a separate entity on each side, just for smoothness of operation, and of course, there'd still be a collaboration between the two, I'm sure.
So in that case, I'll plan on bringing a resolution to the board for consideration at the next meeting to, you know, formally create and again, you know, it doesn't have to be me just making the name up. If anyone has names that we'd like to, you know, offer here.
I guess so.
And
Earl, I
Earl had a comment?
No, I listened to Ron and Fran and Charles. When I came back to the village and rejoined at the time, I thought, and I still think to a certain extent, a countywide EMS system would be great for all of us. That's never going to happen. But in April 2012, after the flood, Mayor Arrington, Chief Franz and I sat together, I was fire commissioner. And the discussion was exactly what you're talking about right now. And under 122B, the general municipal law, blah, 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 a lot of wide options in there, out of which this proposal can fit in at least 3 of those categories. But having said that, at the time, Chief Franz and Mayor Arrington was ready to make that, except their caveat was that I started using the word symbiotic relationship that was there, was not wanting that separation where you get fire department and I happen to think what you're talking about doing, I hope you do say yes, and it becomes a municipal emergency department, emergency services. It's up to you guys to make, and no longer on the board. But the big part about it is, Fran hit it, it's gonna allow each of those entities to manage themselves and function well together. It's gonna force a collaborative, not an authoritarian process. And with that, I think in the end, the village wins all the way around.
So,
Should we ask Jim if he has any input?
No, I think you've covered all the the details. As Paul said, the board of directors for the VOO Emergency Squad, this not-for-profit corporation which we formed, is here. And in general, we're supportive of this move and going this way.
Good.
We're gonna meet tomorrow night. You're invited. Well, we've already scheduled a special meeting, there's an agenda on that meeting, but we can run that stuff up a little bit there.
is there anybody here from the emergency squad that wants to take on the task of finding Billy?
You have 1, 2, 3, 4 officers sitting here. So, we have to do that one way or another.
Right.
It was just one of those exercises that, we've been down this road probably at least 10 times in my career of 25 years in the fire department. So, this is the farthest that we've been, and we'll take it on, right?
Affirmative.
Yeah.
Well, I run with main ambulance anyway, and they do billing.
What's that?
You're gonna explore it for us?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
explore it and we'll come back to the next, village board meeting on the 4th and I can provide you details on email as we're
Yeah.
moving along and then you can disseminate.
You know where to find me.
Yep, yep,
I've worked with 2 other agencies that do it, so.
yeah.
So, I mean, it's worth having a discussion. So, last night, Jim, you indicated that there were about 3 agencies you're familiar with who.
Well, it's, in the past, Paul's mentioned, we've done this
Okay. You will, right?
a number of times, and we had sort of narrowed the list down to 3 the last time around, I think it was. Yeah.
So the question for the board would be, and I mean, now we're putting the carts before horses because we haven't actually passed the resolution to do this yet, but in the interest of, we want to try to get things moving.
Yep.
We could do an RFP for the third-party billing services, just saying, hey, billing services, give us a quote as to what you would charge us and what your terms and conditions are, and that would be something you could take to them and say, hey, here's the RFP,
Yeah.
submit something, anticipated awarding last meeting, March 18th or whatever,
Yeah.
March 18th.
Because some billing companies do things differently than others that are a little strange, but will get a little bit more income at the end.
Right, and those are the nuances that, I mean, the board, your guys are gonna have to really delve into.
Balance it out, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
so,
Do we want a motion to get an RFP?
I don't think we need a motion to do an RFP, we can just ask that
Like
the,
fire.
that the
Yeah.
squad handle that.
Yeah, thank you guys. All right, I think that wraps up department head reports, right? Next item is trustee reports. Ron?
As you know, I live on Temple and Spencer, and I've noticed lately the house that is condemned on Chesco has been opened a lot, and I really would like to see that somehow. It's just becoming very dangerous for a lot of young kids or whoever is involved. I don't know if there's a way to secure that door, or continually open.
The county actually owns that
It
building.
does, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
once
about that.
we agreed to maintain.
Yeah, so we're probably supposed to secure it. We're gonna agree with
Sign
that would be me.
take care of it.
It should, as far as an update on that, I think they were getting quotes to take down those houses. I think they said springtime. That's what
Right.
last time they
I'd
did.
like to see something now, I know there's a lot of.
Oh, yeah, no,
Enforcement.
it needs to be secured.
We'll secure it tomorrow.
Long term.
I guarantee it'll be secured by the end of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Sims.
I'm First Ward, I'd like to have the new OHPC be my, thing, it's mostly resides in my ward, right?
I don't think anybody has that one, does
Do
it?
we have a commissionership for the OSPC?
We
It's not
normally
on
do,
the
yeah.
list, but, yeah,
Yeah, you
I'd
can,
take that on.
that sounds good to me.
So you're pointing under
I have nothing. Do you want zoning and planning too?
You should ask Brent first.
No.
Fran? It kind of sort of goes with OHPC.
Get all the land use. Only 2 extra meetings.
Think about that.
Think about it.
You think about that one.
Zoning and planning only meet when we have something to discuss, so it's not like you're gonna have a meeting every month,
Alright. When are
or
the
2 meetings every month, huh?
What are the meetings?
You're on
It's
calendar.
Monday and Tuesday, the last one of the month.
Can't on the fourth Tuesdays of the month, I can't. I have meetings on both days.
You're not doing that, so think about it, so.
Yeah. I can't do the planning.
And we'll think about it.
So it goes with that.
Ron, did you have anything else?
No, that was it.
Charles?
Just got an update from, East Temple Street, from the residents of East Temple Street. I'd like to relay a thanks to Jeff and DPW and whomever else was responsible for getting the construction crew out there to, do a temporary fix on that street. They were out there the very next morning. They were actually my alarm clock. Although I didn't plan on getting up that early, I was happy to know that they were out there. That's it.
Fran?
Had cemetery committee meeting on the 11th, and, of course, we, discussed the grant and, our plans for, work sessions, for this year, and, I need to talk with Jeff. We'd like to have Jeff come to our meeting in April to review stuff.
That means you'd be happy.
On, last week on Wednesday, went to the, DRI. We had a work session in the afternoon for 3 hours and then 2 hours in the evening, and we did whittle down a few of the projects that were on the list.
Earlier
Brought
today,
them down a little bit.
$5 million was taken off the list.
5, yeah, well,
Today?
Yeah.
Which is the VOO list.
Last
and,
15 million.
as Mike mentioned, just today, I saw it at 5:30 today. They sent out the survey for public to make comments on. And it says, please send link around to your contacts, post to social media. We think it's important to provide the summary of the survey results at the first meeting on Tuesday, March 4th, so it has to be, the survey has to be completed by the 3rd of March. And they said, send it to as many contacts as you can think of, homeowners associations, art communities, high school students, PTA, nonprofit networks, tourism lists, anyone you think would be interested in the downtown. So it's not just limited to people that live in the village. Anybody that's interested, you go online. You can just go to OWEGO DRI and take it to the link, and also you can put it on the,
Yeah, I'll put it everywhere.
When is the DRI meeting?
It's the 5th, actually.
It's Tuesday, and it's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Is that the standard once a month kind of meeting?
no,
That's
that's
the
the third
workshop.
workshop.
That's the workshop.
In public.
At Tioga Opportunities,
The workshop for the public, yes, okay.
6:30.
Yeah, the committee meets next week.
The committee's the next week on Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah, we need to get as many people coming and putting their opinion in, do the survey and come to the
Yeah,
meeting on the
surveys,
5th.
and there will be paper copies of it. A couple locations, I assume the county office building and our office at 178 Main. If somebody doesn't have a computer or whatever.
So I mean, you know people in Appalachian, you know people in North, anybody that wants to put their opinion in, can do the survey.
Good. Rusty?
I have no report except that we need to, I think, encourage that DRI committee, who continues to seem to not want very much to put any money into our fire station, and we need to continue to encourage them to do that, and if they continue to oppose it based on what they believe are the criteria, which is we can't put money into maintenance, we need to continue to try and convince them to put an elevator in that fire station, which isn't maintenance, which is, once again, giving it the option to be used for any kind of municipal use or any kind of development somehow, if we ever get them, I've said this a million times, the money for a fire station. So we, and people in the community, if you're interested, not that I would recommend that you say that survey, but anything that anybody says on that survey to help us
Yeah,
improve our fire station.
That project is on the survey.
It's a good idea, but the project's on there just generally for that whole repair $400,000 project. If we can't have that, we should try and have part of that for elevator, et cetera. That would fit inside their guidelines if the other one. I have no report, just that.
no, those guidelines are kind of loose too. I mean,
Yes, yeah,
my,
they're loose when they want them to be loose, we want them to be loose, and this.
I mean, my point of view on it, it's historic restoration.
Right. Absolutely.
It's definitely a historic building.
We've got to maintain our historic buildings.
But we have to push or else.
Right, let's get taken off the list,
Yeah.
Laura, anything besides the OHPC? Good,
So we're fine.
welcome.
Thank you.
The next item is the mayor's report. I didn't get a chance to print it out, I sent it out to everybody. Posted the video. Me and Ron attended emergency management training, I think they call it. Level 3 something.
Yeah, certification.
Really long. Attended the local planning committee for the DRI. I went to a conference in Albany where they talked about the proposed state budget, the reduction of AIM funding, which I just saw today that they might bring back in some odd way. The legalization of recreational use marijuana. That'll be interesting.
Excited about it.
Jeff's excited about that. Again,
Mandatory.
it's adult recreational use anyway, and grant writing. Tioga County Chamber of Commerce had a 100-year big party Saturday night, just on 8. We had the EMS meeting, and also somewhere in there we had a meeting on a housing model with various people from the community, the school district, developers, realtors, and various agencies, Tioga County. The next DRI public workshop is the 5th, 6:30, Tioga Opportunities. The planning committee is the 13th, which is the next Wednesday. That's it. And then I need to ask for a motion for an executive session about department head.
Yeah, it's big.
Can I ask one question?
Got 1 minute. Just take a public minute so we can, we'll do it after public comment.
I'm now the new executive session guy.
You are.
And another piece of the executive
You want to make a
session,
motion?
I'm going to make a motion, and another piece is for employee compensation.
Okay.
Okay, I make that motion.
So Rusty's making the motion now.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. So vote.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes. We'll have public comment, in case anybody doesn't want to hang around.
Is it okay if I send out to my EMS membership what's going on. I know this is a public meeting,
Yeah.
just so they're not kept in the dark and they, a short snippet.
I put all these
Nothing
on
here is confidential.
YouTube too, so
Okay,
there's links on the village website to the YouTube videos, so
Are you allowed to?
it's all very public, so.
thank you.
I'd like to, along the same line as this, it would be really good if the village board, the trustees here, got enough information so they could actually vote in a couple of weeks. So if we could get the resolution out there,
Yeah.
because timing is important here.
Our budget sure tells us that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the best way to mitigate that risk, is if we can move it along.
Yeah, we wanna get it done too.
Yeah,
They've talked about it since middle of last summer. so.
Nine, ten.
longer than that, actually.
Yeah,
Anyone
well,
else, public comment?
This board has.
Just so that I'm clear. Do you want a presentation made to you, from one of these companies that does the billing so that you understand how this goes? Or is it just, you'll take whatever we bring to you, or what exactly are your wishes so that we are all on the same page?
I think we're at the information stage right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I would expect the board would be able, I would envision timeline here wise, probably March 18th, if not March 18th, then the first meeting in April, a decision would need to be made to choose one of them. And so if the board could get information maybe by the next meeting to even think about it, and then they might say, okay, would you invite someone to then come to a follow-up
Okay.
meeting?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
All right, so we'll have executive session.
Okay, we're out.
Well,
We've been officially booted. Don't take the camera.
Okay. Yeah.